Some of the most severe economic issues facing the United States are rooted in the extreme levels of income and wealth inequality plaguing our society. Such disparities have always been a problem in the country, with an exceedingly large percentage of wealth going to an exceedingly small percentage of the population. Inequality is typically correlated with higher levels of health problems, lower quality of life, and lower life expectancy. In recent years, affluent families have seen the value of their assets increase by almost tenfold. Meanwhile, dozens of millions of middle-class Americans have seen their buying power sharply decline, and the current economic downturn has led many to fall straight into poverty. Over the past 5 decades, there has been a growing concentration of ownership amongst the ultra-wealthy, and now inequality has returned to levels unseen since the beginning of the last century. Today, the richest 0.1% earn 196 times more than the bottom 90%, and they pay significantly less in taxes. On the other hand, the average worker in the U.S. is seeing their paychecks flatlining, while inflation continues to push the cost of living to soar. Even though about 2/3 of Americans say that there's too much inequality in our nation, less than 40% consider it a top priority problem for the government to address. According to analysts at Capital and Maine, we often tend to overlook this matter because we don't fully grasp how deep the gap between the rich and the rest of us really is, or the key role that government has played in enabling that gap to grow. That's why in today's list, we've decided to expose several stats and facts that reveal the true dimension of this alarming problem. But before moving on, please give us your support with a thumbs up in this video and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our upcoming lists. Without further ado, here are 30 harsh facts about income and wealth inequality in America that will shock you. 1. In the last 50 years, hourly wages increased by a dismal 17%, while worker productivity jumped over 72% over the same period, Pew Research data shows. 2. If the income of the bottom 90% kept pace with GDP growth, those in that income tier would have collectively earned more than $3 trillion in 2021. Over the 47 years since 1975 combined, that sum would add up to $51 trillion. 3. The bottom 50% of income earners in the U.S., which represents around 67 million families, only holds 1% of total U.S. household wealth, Capital and Maine reported. 4. A big contributor to the widening inequality gap is the rising number of bad jobs, which are typically considered those that pay low wages and do not include access to health insurance and pension benefits. Today, 44% of Americans are in low-wage jobs. About 50% don't have health insurance, and 46% don't have pensions, according to the latest data released by the research institution Brookings. 5. At the same time, a worrying number of Americans are homeless. On any given night, there are over 750,000 people sleeping in the streets across the U.S., with about 1 in 5 considered chronically homeless. Believe it or not, our country has the highest number of homeless people among industrialized nations, as findings from a study by the Bassuk Center on Homeless and Vulnerable Children and Youth have shown. 6. In 2019, the poverty rate was at 10.5%. But over the past couple of years, that figure has climbed to 14.4%, with a 3.4 million rise in the number of children in poverty last January alone. And although poverty numbers have actually improved over the past decade, having fallen about 7.4%, there are still 40.1 million poor people in the country. Together, an estimated 54% of the total U.S. population, that's 158 million people, are either poor or low income. 7. Inequality also has a major impact on life expectancy. While high-income Americans are living longer, the rest of us have not been a part of this positive trend. According to a study published by the Journal of American Medical Association, in 2020, those in the top 5% of household income could expect to celebrate their 89th birthday, an increase of 4 years since 2000. On the flip side, those in the bottom 5% have seen life expectancy essentially flatlining at around 75 years since the early 1990s. 8. In fact, the same study has found that the very richest live 12 to 17 years longer than the rest of the population. Men in the top 1% of the income distribution can now expect to live 17 years longer than those in the bottom 1%. For women, the difference is about 12 years, researchers noted. 9. Wealth disparities also contribute to mental and physical health problems. A new report released by the American Psychological Association found that U.S. households with annual incomes below $50,000 report higher levels of stress than other families. Blue-collar and low-income jobs are often more stressful and physically demanding than white-collar jobs. Average stress levels gradually declined after the 2007-2008 financial crisis, but the stress gap between rich and poor households has been increasing. This contributes to a variety of other health problems such as high blood pressure, back problems, and diabetes, it highlighted. 10. The lack of reliable and affordable access to health care also increases the gap between the rich and the poor and worsens homelessness, according to the National Coalition for the Homeless. A serious illness can result in enormous health care bills, as well as the loss of a job, savings, and eventually a home, the association noted. From 1980 to 2020, the average person has seen the share of their health expenditures more than double, while their purchasing power shrank by nearly 24%. 11. Last year, 57% of low-income U.S. adults' incomes skipped necessary medical care, such as doctor visits, recommended tests, treatments, follow-up care, or prescription medications because of the high costs. 12. Over the past decade, the number of states in which health insurance premiums and deductibles consumed at least 10% of median income shot up from 7 to 42. 13. On top of that, the cost of education in the U.S. has skyrocketed 600% more than incomes have in the last 50 years. 14. Right now, 25% of Americans don't have any retirement savings, and those who do aren't saving enough. For those approaching retirement ages from 55 to 64 years old, their median retirement savings account of roughly $120,000 will only provide less than $1,000 per month over a 15-year retirement span. 15. To make things worse, since 2000, Social Security benefits have lost 35% of their buying power. 16. In August, 77 million U.S. adults reported that their household found it somewhat or very difficult to cover usual expenses such as food, rent or mortgage, car payments, medical expenses, or student loans, CNBC reported. 17. Conversely, from the early 1980s to 2021, the top 0.1%'s earnings grew 20 times faster than the bottom 90%'s earnings. 18. At the same time, GDP per capita in the U.S. grew 118%, But at the bottom, income only went up by 13.5%, while at the top, it soared by 166%. 19. The massive difference between CEO compensation and the wage of the average manufacturing or production worker has become even more evident in recent years. In the 70s, CEOs made 24 times more than the average production worker, whereas in 2021, they made 351 times more. 20. From 1985 to 2020, the average Wall Street bonus ballooned from $13,970 to $184,000. If the federal minimum wage had increased at the same rate, it would be worth $44.12 today, instead of $7.25, Pew Research found. 21. Last year, the total bonus pool for 182,100 New York City-based Wall Street employees was $31.7 billion, enough to pay for more than 1 million jobs, paying $15 per hour for a year. According to the analysts, given that the very rich can squirrel away much of their income, such huge Wall Street bonuses don't have nearly the stimulus effect as raising pay for low-wage workers who have to spend pretty much every dollar they make. 22. 50% of the national wealth invested in stocks and mutual funds belongs to the top 1% of income earners. Meanwhile, most of the wealth of the bottom 90% of Americans comes from their homes, the asset category that took the biggest hit during the Great Recession. The bottom 90% also holds just around 3/4 of the country's consumer debt. 23. From March 2020 to April 2021, American billionaires saw their wealth rise by $1.62 trillion, an increase that could pay for $4,800 stimulus checks for every single one of the 332 million Americans. 24. An analysis of Forbes data conducted by the Institute for Policy Studies found that the combined wealth of all U.S. billionaires rose by $2.1 trillion, or 73%, from October 2021 to July 2022, from $2.947 trillion way up to $5.019 trillion, with the richest 5 billionaires seeing their fortunes increase 123%, from $349 billion to $779 billion. 25. And did you know that only 3 American billionaires, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and Warren Buffett, own as much wealth as the bottom half of all U.S. households combined? Sounds too crazy to believe, but it's true. 26. As America's richest 0.01% have accumulated more wealth, they have paid a smaller share of total U.S. taxes. In 2021, the tax share of the ultra-wealthy was close to what it was in 1950. By contrast, their share of the nation's wealth nearly quadrupled during that period. 27. In the mid-70s, 1 in 12 Americans who inherited $1 million or more, equivalent to 139,000 people, paid federal estate taxes. Today, fewer than 2,000 estates get taxed at all. 28. The poorest American listed on the first annual Forbes magazine list of America's richest 400, which was released in 1982, had a net worth of $210 million in today's dollars. The average member of that first list had a net worth of $600 million. By 2020, rich Americans needed a net worth of $2.1 billion to enter the Forbes 400, and the average member held a net worth of $8 billion, which is more than 13 times the 1982 average after adjusting for inflation. As of 2020, the net worth of the richest member of this group was 21 times larger than the net worth of the richest member in 1982, and that's in today's dollars. 29. In 2021, corporate CEOs were quick to blame worker wages for fueling inflation growth. But an AFL-CIO analysis exposed that workers' real wages actually dropped 3.6% in 2021 after adjusting for inflation. Meanwhile, S&P 500 companies increased their CEO pay by an average of 18.2% while enjoying record profits and spending a record $882 billion on stock buybacks. 30. Over the last 30 years, America's most affluent families have added to their net worth, while those on the bottom have dipped into negative wealth, which means that the value of their debts largely exceeds the value of their assets, according to the National Bureau of Economic Research data. In 2020, the United States has more income and wealth inequality than in any other period over the past century. The fact that 3 multi-billionaires own more wealth than 160 million Americans should really shock all of us. According to estimates released by The Guardian, today around 45% of all new income produced in our country goes to the pockets of the top 1%. Despite working harder, the average American has never been poorer. Millions of families are struggling financially as living expenses reach the highest levels in over 4 decades. More than 60% of our nation lives paycheck to paycheck, and around 40% earn starvation wages. Even after working for their entire lives, more than a quarter of aging Americans don't have any savings, and many of them believe they'll never be able to retire with dignity, while about 55% of seniors are trying to survive on an income of less than $25 a year, as the article also revealed. Unfortunately, the fact that the ultra-wealthy increased their earning power by 10 times as much as the bottom 50% in just 2 years shouldn't come as a surprise to those who've been watching the decades-long widening between the wealthy and the poor in America. The rising inequality gap leads to a weaker economy, as well as social instability, and it proves that the U.S. has a deeply unfair system that benefits some at the back of others. But as the old management motto says, if you can't measure something, you can't begin to address it. We can tell that these are important issues because the elites work overtime to prevent them from being seriously discussed in our society. The mainstream media, controlled by a handful of conglomerates that decide what we see, hear, and discuss on a daily basis, tend to turn the spotlight away from these problems. But the reality is that over 70 million Americans are uninsured or underinsured. Many families have been unable to keep up with the soaring cost of health care and prescription drugs, which are more expensive in the U.S. than anywhere else on the entire planet. Not only 750,000 people are homeless in our nation, but 23% of U.S. households have to spend 50% or more of their limited incomes on housing. For us to start addressing these disparities, we must evoke the old American spirit that led previous generations to keep fighting for a better future, fighting back against corruption, fighting back against corporate greed. And inequality starts with the individual decision of getting informed on how our system really works. If our school and academic organizations are designed to keep us ignorant and keep us misinformed, we must take the long road and educate ourselves. We all must understand that we have the right to create a country where the economy and the government work for each and every one of us, not only those in the top 1%. America is for all of the hard-working Americans that keep this extraordinary nation not only running, but thriving, despite all of the odds. Thank you for watching. We look forward to your comments under this video, and please share it with family and friends.